I got back late that day, sore and dust-covered from laying foundation stones up on the ridge. The mountain air had turned sharper now that fall was settling in and the sun dipped quick behind the trees. I parked the truck outside our house, the one Mira and I used to dream about over takeout boxes and open laptops, and felt the day's weight loosen from my shoulders just a little. Until I checked my phone. There were a few texts from crew guys, a missed call from the delivery yard, and then a message from Mira. Family group chat. That sinking gut feeling came first, before I even opened it. All my friends' husbands have built something. Mine still works with rocks. Don't come to my birthday dinner. That was the entire message. Beneath it, she'd attached an invite to the party. Glossy, resort-styled, like the ones we used to laugh about when planning our honeymoon. Except this one wasn't a joke. The dinner was happening at the same place we stayed 5 years ago, up at the Jasper Elk Lodge. My name wasn't anywhere on the list. I reread it. Once, twice. The silence that followed was louder than anything she could have shouted. I didn't even know what to say. I wasn't angry, not yet. Just confused. Then numb. Then something else. Like a crack that had been slowly forming had finally split wide open. Mira didn't yell. She didn't throw things or start fights. That wasn't her style. But this? This was a scalpel. Clean and deliberate. I sat down on the edge of the bed, my boots still on, staring at the screen. I wanted to believe it was a joke. A bad mood. Maybe she'd hit send too quick. But I knew her. She crafted her words like her presentations, polished, controlled, strategic. She'd meant it. Every part. The worst part wasn't the insult. It was the absence. There was no trace of the woman who once said she loved that my hands were always dirty, that it reminded her I was building something solid. She used to say I grounded her. Somewhere along the way, my dirt stopped being charming. Somewhere along the way, I became invisible. Her family hadn't texted me in months. Mine stopped asking about her entirely. And I guess I had stopped noticing. Maybe that's what hit the hardest, how long I'd accepted the quiet distance, assuming it would shrink on its own. I kept staring at that message until the screen dimmed. Then I set the phone down gently on the nightstand like it was something fragile, like if I made a sudden move, the rest of our life would collapse with it. And maybe it already had. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I sat in the living room, the one Mira picked the furniture for, the one we painted together over takeout and cheap wine. She wanted clean lines and neutrals. I didn't care much back then. I just liked seeing her excited. Now, I sat in the dim light of a single lamp, surrounded by all the things we picked out, feeling like a ghost in my own house. I didn't argue. Didn't text her back. I didn't even pack. What was there to say? She'd said everything in that message. Don't come. Not we need to talk, not I'm angry, not even you disappointed me. Just erasure. Like I didn't exist. Like all the years between us could be brushed off like dust on a shelf. At some point around 3 or 4 in the morning, I made coffee. Poured it into my old thermos with the dented side from the time I dropped it off the scaffolding. I stood there in the kitchen for a while, staring out the window at the mountain ridge. The same ridge we could see from our deck. The one I worked on during the day. Funny how I could lay stone for a lodge that would outlive all of us, but I couldn't keep my marriage from crumbling. When the sky started turning pale, I finally stood up and grabbed a duffel bag from the closet. Tossed in a couple shirts, jeans, socks. My tool belt went in next, not because I needed it that day, but because it felt wrong to leave it behind. Like leaving a part of myself. I left my ring on the counter. Didn't think about it too hard. Just slid it off and set it down next to the cutting board where Mira used to slice limes for her seltzers. The air outside was sharp when I stepped off the porch. I didn't look back. The hardware store sat just off Main Street in town. Been there for decades. My buddy Darren owned it now, took it over from his uncle. Years ago, he'd offered to let me stay in the room above it if I ever needed a place. Back then, it was just an offer between beers. But I remembered. He didn't ask questions when I showed up that morning. Just handed me the spare key, nodded, and said, "Fridge is empty. I'll grab you some eggs later." That first night, I lay on a twin bed with a thin blanket, staring at a ceiling that creaked when trucks passed. It was cold, quiet, and smelled like wood oil. But somehow it felt more honest than anything I'd known in a long time. The days got longer after that. Not because of the sun that was still setting earlier, curling the edges of the sky and burned orange by 5, but because I made them longer. I threw myself into the work. Showed up at the stone yard before anyone else. Stayed later on job sites than the crew. There was no reason to go back early to a room with bare walls and a mini-fridge that hummed all night. I didn't miss Mira exactly. I missed the version of her I'd believed in. The one who used to call my work beautiful. The one who said I had magic in my hands when I finished the fireplace in our first rental. That woman was long gone, and if I was being honest, maybe she'd been fading for a while. I just hadn't wanted to see it. So I worked. I started bringing manuals home. Stone shaping, masonry codes, retaining wall standards. Piles of them. Darren laughed when I checked out 6 in one day from the little library down the road. I told him I was studying. He said I looked like I was prepping for an exam no one was giving. Nights were quiet. No TV, no music. Just my pencil scratching over paper as I drew and redrew a better drainage system for tiered gardens. I wasn't an engineer, not officially, but I knew what failed in the field. I'd seen walls bow and crack from runoff too many times. So I sketched, tweaked, figured out what might work better. Mira never texted. Not once. Not to ask where I was. Not to say she was sorry. Not even to see if I'd gotten the message. And her silence said more than any words could have. Her family, who used to treat me like one of their own, vanished. Her mom, who once told me I was the most stable thing Mira had ever chosen, stopped sending the annual check-in emails. Her brother, who'd borrowed my truck for 3 months once, didn't even like my posts anymore. I deleted the family group chat one night without thinking. My thumb hovered over the button, but it didn't feel dramatic. Just overdue. The ring stayed on the counter, and when Darren asked if I wanted to move it to a drawer so I didn't have to see it every day, I shook my head. Let it sit there. Let it gather dust like everything else we let rot while pretending it was fine. At the sight, I stopped waiting for people to ask my opinion. I just offered it. Not loud. Not pushy. Just direct. That slope's gonna crack after the first freeze. We should regrade it. Sometimes they listened. Sometimes they didn't. But I kept showing up. I wasn't trying to prove anything. Not anymore. I wasn't chasing Mira's approval or hoping someone would tell me I mattered. That part of me had gone quiet. What was left was focus. Something clean. Unrelenting. And, in its own quiet way, hopeful. It started with the slope behind the visitor cabins. The plan said a basic retaining wall with drain gravel would do the job, but the soil was loose and the runoff line from the hill above cut right through it every time it rained. Most guys would have just followed the blueprint. Minimum bid, minimum effort. But I couldn't do it. I'd seen too many of those walls fail. Always after the check cleared. So I stayed late one evening, flagged the site supervisor, and laid it out. You're gonna get separation here, I told him, tapping the corner of the blueprint. Even with gravel, the water's got nowhere to go. It'll swell behind the wall, then crack it top down. He frowned. What do you suggest? I flipped my sketch pad open. Showed him the French drain system I'd been working on. It wasn't fancy, just re-angled perforated pipe with proper slope and a couple filter cloth layers, but it let the water out clean, kept the wall dry. To his credit, he listened. Next morning, we tested it. Built a sample panel and hosed it for an hour. The slope held. The runoff drained smooth. No swelling. No shift. 2 days later, he called in the regional guys. Walked them over to the test plot, let me do the talking. I wasn't nervous. Just clear. This is cheaper than replacing the wall in 2 years, I said, and less disruptive than rebuilding it once the landscaping's already in. They nodded, took notes. One of them asked for a copy of the layout. The next week, they used my design on 3 other sites. That was the first time anyone outside my crew called me anything other than the rock guy. Now they said my name. I started getting pulled into budget meetings, not because I had a degree, but because I'd been in the dirt long enough to know what worked. I didn't wear a tie or say much, but when I spoke, people paused. That winter, they offered me the lead on the new community amphitheater project. Same ridge. Bigger scope. I said yes, then got back to work. I didn't celebrate. There was no toast or dinner out. Just a note I scribbled in my sketchbook when I got home, fix what fails. Then keep going. I was still living above the hardware store. Still drinking black coffee from the same old thermos. But something was shifting. Not loud. Not flashy. Just steady. And I was finally starting to believe that was enough. I met Arya on a Tuesday. The job was a streambank restoration on the north end of the valley, just past where the pines give way to open slope. She was the environmental geologist consulting on runoff and soil integrity, smart, quiet, carried a clipboard and wore boots that actually had mud on them. That caught my eye first. Most folks like her showed up in clean shoes and made recommendations they read from a manual. She didn't do that. She squatted down beside the exposed root system and stuck her fingers into the soil like she meant it. We didn't talk much that day. I showed her where the erosion was undercutting the path. She nodded, asked if I'd ever worked with GeoGrid before. I told her I'd laid a few, but they failed if the backfill wasn't right. Most folks don't catch that, she said, almost to herself. They blame the fabric. Next day, she brought coffee. Not the fancy kind. Just 2 thermoses and a bag of cinnamon rolls she said were a bribe for my opinion. It became a habit. Some mornings she'd be waiting at the truck before I even stepped out. We'd sit on the tailgate, sipping hot coffee, going over runoff maps and rock placements. Other times we'd talk about nothing, the strange calls she used to get while working parklands in Nevada, how my crew once spent an entire afternoon trying to rescue a raccoon that fell into a storm basin. It was easy. That's what threw me. We weren't flirting. We weren't trying. Just being. And I hadn't had that in a long time. One morning, she looked at the sketchbook I kept rolled under my arm and asked to see it. I handed it over without thinking. She flipped through the pages slowly, nodding, sometimes smiling. When she got to the retaining wall drainage design, she looked up at me. You ever think about submitting this to a journal? She asked. I laughed. It's just notes. No, she said, tapping the page. It's experience most people skip. There's value in that. That night, I found myself lying in bed, not thinking about Mira, not about the past, but about how Arya said that word, value. Not just work. Not just effort. But value. A couple weeks later, we had dinner at her place. She grilled salmon and overcooked the rice, and we sat on her small porch as the wind carried in the smell of damp moss. I told her about the message Mira sent. The birthday dinner. The rocks. Arya didn't frown. Didn't say anything right away. Then she looked at me and said, then you've already built more than most. That was the night I let myself feel it, the weight of being seen. Not for what I used to be. Not for who I could impress. Just for who I was, boots and all. We didn't rush into anything. We just kept showing up, tailgates, coffee, shared sketches, and quiet understanding. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to prove myself to stay. Arya told me she was pregnant on a Thursday morning. We were sitting on a bench outside the municipal office waiting for permits. She didn't make it a big moment. No announcement. No nervous build-up. She just leaned into my shoulder, her voice soft and steady, and said, I took a test. Twice. It's real. I didn't say anything at first. Not because I wasn't happy but because something in me locked up. Not fear. Not regret. Just hesitation. Like I was standing at the edge of something good and I wasn't sure I deserved to take the step. She looked at me, eyes wide and searching. You okay? I nodded, rubbed the back of my neck. Yeah. It's just been a while since something good came without a warning sign. She smiled, small and knowing. You'll get used to it. But I wasn't so sure. It wasn't the idea of being a dad that rattled me. It was trusting that this time it wouldn't fall apart. That I wouldn't be told again, in words or in silence, that I wasn't enough. Then, about 2 weeks later, Mira came back. Not in person. Not at first. It started with a friend forwarding me a screenshot of an article. Local builders innovating in sustainable design. I was in the feature photo, standing in front of a curved granite amphitheater wall, hands crossed over a level, grinning like I didn't know someone was taking the picture. The headline called me the Stone Whisperer. I didn't think much of it until the messages started. Old coworkers. People I hadn't heard from in years. Congratulations. Proud of you. Didn't know you were doing such big things? Then one from Mira's cousin, just a fire emoji and damn, Cal. That night I got a text from Mira herself. Mira, proud of who you've become. We should talk. I read it once. Then again. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The silence was the answer. I didn't delete it right away. Just set the phone down and let it sit there next to my dinner plate. Arya noticed. She didn't ask who it was. She didn't need to. Her eyes flicked to the screen, then back to me. Calm. No jealousy. Just quiet understanding. She reached across the table and took my hand. Held it. That was all. And in that moment I realized something. I wasn't building for recognition anymore. I wasn't looking back to prove anything to the people who had walked away. My life wasn't a comeback. It was a beginning. One I carved stone by stone. Mira was a chapter, sure. But the story kept going. And the only loyalty that mattered now was to the life that was growing beside me, within Arya, and in every quiet choice we made together. It was a crisp morning when Mira showed up. The kind where your breath hangs in the air and the ground crunches under your boots. I was on site early, walking the perimeter of the new school library build, clipboard in one hand, coffee in the other, when I saw her. She stood near the scaffolding, dressed like she was heading to a gallery opening, tailored coat, polished boots, makeup done with care. She didn't belong there, not among the sawdust and steel. When she saw me, she smiled faintly, like we were running into each other at a farmer's market instead of a job site I hadn't even told her about. Callum, she said, stepping forward. Can we talk? The crew kept working, though a few glanced over. I didn't make a scene. Just held her gaze for a beat and said, this isn't a good time. It'll only take a minute, she said quickly. I'm working. That was all I gave her. She blinked, taken aback. I could see the shift behind her eyes. She wasn't used to being turned away. Not by me. Before she could speak again, I turned and walked back toward the site office, calm as the frost under my boots. Later that night, I found a letter tucked under the door of the apartment above the hardware store. My name written in her looping script. I didn't open it right away. Made dinner first. Washed the dishes. Fed the neighbor's cat I'd been watching for the week. Then I sat down, peeled open the envelope and read. She wrote about our past, the house we built, the wedding at Jasper Elk, the good times. Then she shifted. Said she regretted how things ended. That she had a lot of growing up to do. And finally, near the end, she asked if she could meet the baby. Since I was part of your beginning, she wrote. Maybe I can be there for this next part. I folded the letter, laid it on the counter beside my empty mug, and stared at it for a long while. Then I picked up my phone and called her. She answered on the second ring. Callum, she started. I cut in, gentle but firm. No. She was quiet. You walked away, Mira, I said. Long before that message. Long before the party. I know, she whispered. I'm not angry, I said. But you don't get to come back because things turned out okay. This life, it was built after you. There was silence on the line. I could hear her breathing. I wish you well, I added. But this door's closed. Then I hung up. Arya was sitting on the couch when I returned. She looked up from her book, eyebrows raised slightly. Everything all right? Yeah, I said, sliding down beside her. Just tying off an old piece of rope. She nodded and leaned her head against my shoulder. No questions. Just peace. And that was more than enough. We moved in on a Sunday, just as the leaves started to turn. Reds and golds scattered across the valley like confetti. The new house sat at the edge of the ridge, right where the slope softened into meadow. You could see 3 peaks from the back porch, and on clear days, the lake shimmered like glass far off below. It wasn't big, but it was ours. Every nail, every beam, every stone chosen on purpose. I laid the fireplace myself. Took me 3 weekends. Chipped and shaped each rock by hand, just like I used to when I was just the rock guy on job sites. This time, though, the work felt different. Not about earning approval. Not about showing what I could do. It felt like putting down roots. Arya picked out the paint colors. Earth tones. Nothing flashy. She wanted a reading nook near the south window and a wide kitchen counter because she liked to spread out when she cooked. I gave her both. Our daughter, Mira, had just started toddling. Her first steps happened on the plywood subfloor before the hardwood came in. She liked to trail after me, chubby hands gripping my pant leg as I worked. Said Dada like it was a declaration, not just a word. She squealed when we carried her over the threshold for the first time, her little body wiggling in Arya's arms like she could already feel the shift that this place was hers too. We had neighbors, the kind that brought over jam and asked if we needed help with the move. A retired couple with a golden retriever. A teacher and her husband who liked woodworking. Good folks. Quiet. Friendly without being nosy. One evening, after the last box was unpacked, Arya found a scrap of paper in one of my old notebooks. It was a note I'd scribbled to myself months ago, back when everything felt like rubble and I wasn't sure I had the right to start again. She read it aloud, soft and smiling, steady builds strong. She framed it. Hung it on the wall above the workbench in the garage. That night, we sat on the porch wrapped in a shared blanket, Mira asleep inside, the stars spilling over the mountain sky like salt from a tip jar. No music. No distractions. Just the creak of the rocking chair and the hush of the wind through pine. Arya leaned into me, her head on my shoulder, belly just starting to show with our second child. Think we'll ever get bored of this? She asked. I looked out over the valley, the same place where I'd once felt like a man left behind. No, I said, pulling her a little closer. Not a chance. We didn't talk much after that. Didn't need to. Sometimes peace doesn't make a sound. Sometimes it just settles in, quiet and sure, and you realize the noise was never what you missed. Mira turned 5 on a clear, windy day in October. The kind of day where the sun feels closer even as the air sharpens. We didn't throw a big party, no bounce house, no event planners. Just a few friends, a homemade apple pie, and a fire pit in the backyard we'd ringed with smooth stones from the stream Arya liked to hike with her students. Our neighbors came by with their kids. Darren brought his dog and a 6-pack. Arya's sister showed up late with a lopsided gift bag and the kind of laugh that filled every corner of the yard. It wasn't loud. It wasn't flashy. But it was full. Real. Mira wore a blue dress with tiny daisies stitched along the sleeves. Arya let her pick it out that morning and she wore it like a crown. She ran around barefoot despite the chill, chasing bubbles, shrieking with joy like the wind couldn't catch her. I grilled hot dogs while Arya handed out mugs of warm cider. No one was in a rush. The afternoon melted into early evening without anyone checking their watch. After the pie, Mira didn't like cake, said it was too spongy. We sat around the fire while she opened gifts. A wooden dollhouse. A stack of books about rocks and planets. A tiny pink flashlight she immediately turned on and pointed at her own face for dramatic effect. Then, as the sun slipped low and the shadows stretched across the yard, she climbed into my lap, warm and sticky with apple pie filling, and looked up at me with her big, serious eyes. "Who's our family?" she asked. Just like that. No preamble. I blinked. Around us, people were laughing. Darren was telling a story about falling off a ladder. Arya was pouring cider into someone's cup. The fire crackled. The moment felt so small, so quiet, and so heavy. I looked down at her, brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "The people who stay," I said. She nodded like that made perfect sense. Then she yawned, curled into my chest, and was asleep before the flames burned down. I looked out at the yard, at the porch strung with lights, at the laughter that came easy now. Mira didn't cross my mind. Not really. Her name wasn't spoken. Her presence didn't linger. That shadow had no weight here. Later, after everyone left, Arya and I stood at the edge of the yard, holding hands in the dark, watching the last of the embers cool. "She's got a good life," Arya said, voice low. "She doesn't know anything else," I replied. And that was the point, wasn't it? No caveats. No hidden bruises of memory. Just peace. Mira would grow up knowing love wasn't something she had to earn by becoming easier to look at or quieter to love. She'd grow up knowing the people who matter are the ones who stay. And I'd grow old knowing that I'd finally learned the difference. The trail was one I hadn't walked in a while. It cut through the upper ridge, past the bend in the river where I used to eat lunch when we were building the lodge. I took it slow, boots crunching over pine needles and frost-hardened dirt. The cold air bit at my cheeks, but I didn't mind. It reminded me I was still here. Still moving. I had the day to myself. Arya insisted. "Go," she said this morning, kissing my cheek. "Before the next baby turns your knees into furniture." I packed light, water, a granola bar, and Myra's drawing of our house tucked into my back pocket. She made me promise I'd bring it with me, said it was for luck. "Because you build things," she'd whispered, serious as a preacher. So I made one too. The ridge looked different now. Cleaner. Healthier. The saplings we planted years ago had taken root. The creek ran clearer, flowing through the stone channel I helped dig by hand. What used to be a scar of erosion now bloomed with native grass and low shrubs. The path curved along the edge, and from the top I could see it all. The old job site, now a community center, alive with weekend markets and music nights. The valley dotted with new homes, smarter ones, built to last longer and take less from the land. And our house, small from up here, tucked into the trees, smoke curling up from the chimney, the porch lit just enough to catch your eye. I sat on the rock ledge and took it all in. Let the quiet settle into my bones. I didn't think about what I'd lost. Not Mira. Not the years I spent trying to prove myself. That was gone. Burned off like morning fog. I thought about what I'd kept. What I'd earned. What I'd built. Then I said it just loud enough for the wind to carry. Not revenge. Renewal. The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They belonged right here, where stone met sky. Somewhere below, faint and bright as birdsong, I heard Myra's laughter roll across the field. Wild and free. Like the world had never broken. I closed my eyes and smiled. That was the legacy. Not monuments. Not applause. Just a life built slow, steady, and strong. One stone at a time.